Have you ever felt that quiet fear, the moment your child stops telling you little secrets, and you wonder if trust is slowly breaking right in front of you? In this story, I'll share how life in the United States, cultural differences, parenting mistakes, and one honest conversation helped me rebuild connection with my daughter, and how this journey can also rebuild your confidence in learning English through real, emotional storytelling. When secret go silent. Have you ever noticed that the most painful changes in life do not arrive loudly? They do not slam the door. They do not shout. They simply grow quiet. That is how it began with my daughter. One day, she was telling me everything. Small stories from school. Who sat next to her in class? Which friend said something funny? Even the tiny secrets children whisper like they are protecting the universe. Then slowly, the stories became shorter. School was fine. Nothing happened. I'm just tired. If you are a parent living in the United States, especially raising children in American culture where independence is encouraged early, you may understand this shift. Children grow. They form their own identities. Privacy becomes important. But this felt different. It wasn't independence. It was distance. And distance in a relationship rarely starts with conflict. It starts with silence. As someone who talks on this channel about real English story practice, about learning through real-life emotions, I want you to listen carefully to the words I use here: silence, distance, trust, connection. These are not advanced vocabulary words. They are simple. But they carry emotional weight in American English conversations. Back to that week. We were sitting at the dinner table in our home in the United States. The heater was running because it was early winter. Outside, the sky became dark at 5 p.m., something that still surprises me every year. She scrolled on her phone between bites. I asked, "How was your day?" "Good." That was it. In the past, good would be followed by 5 minutes of storytelling. Now it felt like a wall. You know that feeling when your brain starts creating stories? Mine did. Maybe she doesn't trust me. Maybe I was too strict last week. Maybe she's hiding something. Maybe I failed as a father. Psychologists call this cognitive distortion, when the brain fills gaps in information with worst-case assumptions. When communication decreases, anxiety increases. That is not weakness. That is biology. Our nervous system is designed to protect connection. When connection feels threatened, we react. Some parents react with control. Some react with anger. Some react with fear disguised as discipline. I reacted with quiet panic. Living in America has taught me something about parenting culture here. Children are encouraged to speak up, to question, to develop independence early. Schools promote emotional expression. Teachers ask students how they feel. So when my daughter stopped expressing herself at home, I felt like I was failing at the very thing American parenting values: open communication. One night, after she went to bed, I sat in the living room thinking about our life here in the US. The cultural differences. The climate of constant activity. The pressure children face socially and academically. Was she overwhelmed? Was she protecting herself? Or was she protecting herself from me? I remembered something important about trust. Trust does not disappear in one dramatic moment. It fades through small, repeated misunderstandings. Maybe I interrupted her too often. Maybe I gave advice when she just wanted empathy. Maybe I corrected instead of listened. Research in attachment psychology shows that children share more when they feel emotionally safe, not when they feel evaluated. If every conversation becomes a lesson, children eventually stop bringing stories. That realization hit hard. Because I am someone who loves solving problems. If she told me about a conflict with a friend, I offered solutions. If she mentioned stress about homework, I gave strategies. I thought I was helping. But maybe she just wanted space to speak. You might recognize this pattern in your own life. When learning English, for example, many people stop speaking not because they lack vocabulary, but because they fear correction. When every sentence is evaluated, silence feels safer. My daughter may have been experiencing something similar emotionally. At breakfast the next morning, I tried something different. Instead of asking a question, I made a simple observation.
I like when we together in the morning.
She looked at me, slightly surprised.
Yeah, she said softly.
No advice.
No follow-up interrogation. Juste présence.
It was a small shift. But small shifts matter. In American family life, especially in busy households where both parents' work and schedules are full, communication often becomes transactional. Did you finish homework?
What time is practice? Don't forget your jacket.
We manage logistics well. But emotions require slowness. And slowness is uncomfortable in a culture that moves fast. That evening, I resisted the urge to check her phone. I resisted the urge to demand deeper answers. Instead, I focused on something simple, being available without pressure. Psychology research suggests that emotional availability increases voluntary sharing. When children feel they can speak without immediate judgment, they are more likely to open up. So I waited. Not passively, but patiently. Waiting is not weakness. It is restraint. As days passed, the silence still existed. But it no longer felt like a crisis. It felt like a season. And seasons change. If you are listening to improve your American English listening skills, notice how this story uses repetition intentionally. Silence, trust, distance, patience. Repetition helps your brain absorb vocabulary naturally. That is why storytelling is powerful for language learning. You are not just memorizing words. You are feeling them. And feelings create memory. That first week of quiet did not end with a dramatic breakthrough. There was no emotional movie scene. There was just awareness. Awareness that trust is fragile. Awareness that control can damage connection. Awareness that sometimes, when secrets go silent, the solution is not louder questions. It is softer presence. And I was only beginning to understand what that would require of me.
The quai d'inétable.
There is something about a dinner table that reveals the truth. In American family culture, dinner is supposed to be the daily reunion. The moment when everyone pauses their busy schedules, puts away distractions, and reconnects. You see it in movies, in parenting blogs, in advice columns about building strong family communication. But real life in the United States is rarely that simple. Our dinner table had slowly become efficient. Plates placed down quickly. Short updates. Quick reminders about tomorrow's schedule. The television off, but phones nearby. Conversations that sounded complete, yet felt empty. If you had walked into our home, nothing would have looked wrong. We were polite, calm, organized. But emotional distance does not look dramatic. It looks normal. That's what makes it dangerous.
One evening, I paid closer attention.
Not to what my daughter said, but to what she didn't say. She answered every question correctly. Yes, she finished homework. Yes, practice went well. Yes, she had a math quiz on Friday. Her tone was neutral. Not angry. Not sad. Neutral can be misleading. In psychology, there is a concept called emotional withdrawal. It happens when someone reduces emotional sharing to protect themselves. They remain physically present but emotionally guarded. I started asking myself a hard question. Had our home become a place of performance instead of presence? In American culture, children are often busy. School, extracurricular activities, social media, academic pressure. They learn early to manage impressions, to appear confident, to present a version of themselves. Maybe my daughter was practicing that skill at home too. Maybe she didn't feel unsafe. Maybe she felt evaluated. That night, I experimented. Instead of asking about her day, I shared something small about mine. I made a mistake at work today, I said casually. I sent the wrong file in an email. She looked up. What happened? I felt embarrassed, I admitted. But it wasn't the end of the world. There was a short pause. Then she smiled slightly. That moment mattered. Research in family communication shows that vulnerability from parents increases openness from children. When authority figures model emotional honesty, it reduces pressure on younger family members to appear perfect. Perfection creates silence.
Imperfection invite conversation.
I realized that most of my dinner questions had sounded like evaluations. How did you do on the test? Did you finish everything? Are you prepared? Even when asked kindly, these questions focus on performance. What if she needed more curiosity and less assessment? The next evening, I tried again. What was the most interesting moment of your day? She hesitated. Then she said, we had to present in front of the class. I waited. Silence can feel uncomfortable, especially in American conversational style, where quick responses are common. But silence also gives space. It was awkward, she added quietly. Presenting is hard, I said.
Isti get nerveux.
That was it.
Nos lectures en confidence. Nos motivational speech.
Just shared humanity. You might notice something important here, especially if you are learning English through storytelling. The sentences are simple. The vocabulary is everyday American English. Words like nervous, awkward, embarrassed, interesting.
Dis si sauréal conversation open. Note complicated grammar. Clear émotion.
Back at the table, the atmosphere felt slightly different. Not dramatically warm, but softer. However, I also noticed something else. When her phone vibrated, her attention shifted immediately. Social connection outside the home was active. Inside the home, connection required effort.
This is the modern American family reality. Digital life compete with physical presence.
Teenagers often feel more understood by peers online than by parents at the table. Instead of criticizing screen time immediately, I asked myself another uncomfortable question. Was I modeling the same behavior? How many times had I checked emails during dinner? How many times had I nodded while thinking about work? Children notice what we normalize. If divided attention becomes standard, emotional depth decreases naturally. So I made a small rule for myself. Phone in another room during dinner. Not announced dramatically. Just practiced quietly. Behavioral psychology suggests that environmental changes influence relational quality more than verbal demands. When you change the physical setting, you change the emotional possibility. Within a few days, I noticed micro-changes. Longer eye contact. Slightly longer answers. Occasional spontaneous comments. Trust was not fully restored. But the dinner table no longer felt like a checkpoint. It felt like a shared space again. One night, she asked me a question first. How was your day? It was a simple sentence, but it signaled something important. Curiosity was returning. That evening, after she went upstairs, I reflected on something powerful. Trust rarely breaks in one dramatic event. It weakens when connection becomes mechanical. And connection strengthens when presence becomes intentional. If you are practicing American English listening skills right now, I encourage you to notice rhythm.
Notice répétition.
Notice how emotional language repeats naturally. This is how fluency grows. Not by memorizing rules, but by absorbing patterns. The quiet dinner table taught me something fundamental about parenting in the United States. Freedom is valued. Independence is encouraged. But emotional safety is still the foundation. Without safety, communication becomes formal. With safety, communication becomes voluntary. And voluntary sharing is what I missed most. That week did not solve everything. But it showed me that rebuilding trust would not require dramatic speeches. It would require consistency. Presence.
Aie the courage to examine my own habit before blaming her.
The table was still the same wood. The plates were still the same dishes. But the atmosphere had begun to shift. And sometimes, that is how healing begins, not loudly but gently. Climate, culture, and growing up. Winter in the United States can feel long.
The sun sets early.
The air becomes sharp. People move quickly from car to house, house to store, store to school. Life continues. But it happens indoors. I started wondering if the climate outside was affecting the climate inside our home. In many parts of America, especially suburban neighborhoods like ours, daily life is structured and busy. Children wake up early, attend school for 7 hours, participate in activities, finish homework, and then collapse into bed. It looks productive. It also feels exhausting. My daughter was growing up in this rhythm. A rhythm very different from the childhood I had experienced. In the US, independence is introduced early. Children are encouraged to speak for themselves, make decisions, manage schedules, and build individual identity. That sounds healthy, and often it is. But independence can sometimes be confused with emotional self-sufficiency. I began asking myself something uncomfortable. Had I expected her to handle her emotions alone because American culture promotes being strong and handling your own problems? In school, teachers ask students to share opinions. They encourage debate. They promote self-confidence. These are positive values. But confidence in public does not always mean comfort in private. At home, I had always tried to be supportive. I provided structure. I attended school events. I offered advice when needed. But advice and availability are not the same thing. Growing up in the United States also means navigating cultural pressures that did not exist years ago. Social media comparison. Academic competition. The expectation to figure out your passion at a young age. Teenagers today are exposed to constant evaluation. And evaluation creates caution. If every action feels observed, online or offline, sharing vulnerability becomes risky.
I remember reading about adolescent brain development.
Neuroscience shows that during teenage years, the emotional centers of the brain are highly active, while the prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and impulse control, is still developing. In simple terms, teenagers feel intensely, but they do not always know how to explain those feelings. Instead of interpreting her quietness as rejection, maybe it was overload. Maybe her silence was not distance from me. Maybe it was protection from pressure. American parenting often emphasizes achievement and independence. What do you want to be? Is asked early. Goals are discussed frequently. I began to notice how often I asked future-focused questions. What are you planning for next semester? Have you thought about your electives? Are you preparing for college? These are normal questions in American family conversations. But when asked repeatedly, they shift attention away from the present. What if she needed more "How are you feeling today?" and less "What's your plan?" One Saturday morning, snow covered our neighborhood. Everything looked quiet and soft. No school. No rush. I decided to take a walk alone. Cold air has a way of clearing mental noise. As I walked, I reflected on cultural differences. In America, children are encouraged to move out, to build independence, to create their own path. Parents prepare them to leave. That preparation can unintentionally create emotional distance earlier than necessary. Had I been training her for independence without strengthening emotional interdependence? There is a psychological principle called secure attachment. It does not prevent independence. It supports it. When children feel securely connected at home, they explore the world more confidently and return willingly. Secure attachment is built through responsiveness, not control.
Note constant instruction.
Responsiveness. When she shared something small, did I respond with curiosity?
Hors correction.
When she expressed frustration, did I validate the emotion or minimize it? These questions were uncomfortable. But growth often begins in discomfort. If you are learning English through this real English story practice, pay attention to how simple cultural words carry deeper meaning. Independence, pressure, responsibility, connection. These are common in American conversations about family life. Understanding these themes helps you not only improve listening skills but also understand American social values. Back home, I decided to try something subtle. Instead of initiating conversations about performance or plans, I began commenting on shared experiences. This winter feels longer than usual.
She looked slightly.
Yeah, it's depressing. That word caught my attention. Depressing. Just dark, she clarified. Teenagers sometimes use strong words casually. But language reveals emotional states. Dark. heavy, tired. These are emotional signals. Instead of correcting her word choice, I explored it gently. What makes it feel dark? She shrugged at first, then said, everything feels the same every day. Routine can create stability. It can also create monotony. In American suburban life, routine is predictable. School, homework, activities. Safety is high, but emotional novelty can be low. Maybe she wasn't withdrawing from me. Maybe she was overwhelmed by repetition. As parents, we often search for dramatic explanations when small environmental factors play a role. Climate affects mood.
Social rythme affecte énergie.
Cultural expectations affect communication style.
Understanding, contexte reduce panique.
Instead of labeling her behavior as rebellion or secrecy, I began viewing it as adaptation to her environment. That shift changed my tone. And tone changes outcomes. By the end of that week, our conversations were still short, but they were no longer tense. I had stopped interpreting silence as personal failure. I had started interpreting it as developmental transition. Growing up in America means learning autonomy early. But autonomy does not mean emotional isolation. And if I wanted her to trust me again, I needed to understand the world she was navigating, not just the words she was withholding. Sometimes trust does not break dramatically. It simply becomes quieter as life becomes louder. And my job was not to force volume. It was to restore safety. The day I checked her phone. It didn't happen because I was angry. It happened because I was afraid. Fear rarely announces itself honestly. It disguises itself as responsibility.
À protection.
As just making sure everything is okay. That afternoon, my daughter left her phone on the kitchen counter while she ran upstairs to grab something. The screen lit up with a notification. I didn't see the full message, just a name and a few words. My heart rate changed instantly. It's amazing how quickly the brain can create a complete story from incomplete information. In less than 3 seconds, I imagined secrets, hidden struggles, influences I couldn't see. And then I did something I had promised myself I wouldn't do. I picked up her phone. Let me say something clearly for those listening for American English learning. Notice the emotional verbs here. Picked up, imagined, promised. Simple verbs.
Strong meaning. 10 Isao Real Emotional Storytelling Works.
Back in the kitchen, I told myself I was only checking to protect her. That's what parents in the United States often struggle with. American culture values privacy, even for teenagers. At the same time, parents feel responsible for safety.
Its attention. Freedom versus protection. Trust versus monitoring.
I unlocked the phone. The messages weren't dramatic. No crisis. No danger.
Just conversation with friends.
Inside jokes. Complaints about school. A comment about a teacher being annoying. A few emojis I didn't fully understand. Nothing catastrophic. But something shifted inside me. It wasn't relief. It was guilt. Because the issue was no longer what she might be hiding. The issue was what I had just broken. Trust is not only about what children do. It is also about what parents choose not to do. Psychology research shows that when adolescents perceive surveillance instead of trust, they share less voluntarily. Monitoring may increase short-term control, but it decreases long-term openness. In that moment, standing alone in my kitchen in suburban America, I realized something uncomfortable. I had acted from anxiety, not wisdom. Anxiety narrows focus. It searches for threats. It pushes immediate action. But immediate action is not always healthy action. When she came back downstairs, she grabbed her phone without noticing anything different. I felt different. That evening at dinner, I couldn't look at her the same way. Not because she had done something wrong. Because I had. There's an important psychological principle called projection. When we fear losing connection, we sometimes project that fear outward. We assume distance must be caused by external influence, friends, social media, environment. But sometimes the distance grows because we stop tolerating uncertainty. Uncertainty is uncomfortable, especially in parenting. American parenting culture talks a lot about staying involved.
Knowing your child's world.
Being present. But involvement is not the same as intrusion. And I had crossed into intrusion. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about something deeper. Why was I so afraid? Was it truly about safety? Or was it about control? If she stopped telling me secrets, maybe I felt irrelevant. Maybe I felt replaceable. Maybe I feared that her emotional world was expanding beyond my reach. That fear is not unique to me. Many parents experience it as children grow. Developmental psychology explains that adolescence is a natural stage of identity separation. Teenagers build peer bonds. They experiment with self-definition. It is healthy, but it can feel like loss. And loss can trigger reactive behavior. For those practicing English listening skills, notice how often emotional storytelling includes reflective questions. Why was I afraid? What was I protecting? This style is common in American self-development conversations. The next morning, I made a decision. I would not pretend it didn't happen. But I also would not confess impulsively in a way that transferred my anxiety onto her. Instead, I needed to rebuild trust internally first. Trust begins with self-regulation. Neuroscience tells us that when the nervous system is activated, heart rate elevated, thoughts racing, the brain's logical center becomes less active. Reactivity increases. Reflection decreases. So I slowed down. Literally. I took a longer walk than usual.
I breathed slowly.
I allowed the initial fear to pass before making any new decisions.
By the afternoon, I understood something clearly.
If I wanted her to trust me with secrets again, I had to demonstrate that I could handle not knowing everything. Emotional safety requires space. Space requires restraint. That evening, she mentioned casually that she was stressed about a group project. This was a test moment. The old version of me might have asked detailed questions. Who are you working with? What exactly is happening? Why didn't you tell me earlier? Instead, I responded differently. That sounds frustrating. She nodded. We sat in silence for a few seconds. Then she added, I just don't want to mess it up. There it was.
Note à secret about danger. À secret about pressure.
If I had confronted her about the phone that day, she might have shut down further. Instead, by regulating my own fear, I created room for voluntary sharing. That doesn't mean checking her phone had no consequence. The consequence was internal. I had to confront my own insecurity as a parent. Living in the United States, where teenage independence is culturally reinforced, means accepting gradual emotional distance as part of growth. But distance does not have to mean disconnection. And control does not equal closeness. That day in the kitchen taught me something I didn't expect.
Trust doesn't break only when children need things.
It breaks when fear replaces patience. And patience is much harder than checking a phone. When she finally closed her door. The first time she locked her bedroom door, it felt louder than it should have. It was just a soft click. But to me, it sounded like a boundary. In American households, closed bedroom doors often represent independence, privacy,
Personal space. Developmental growth.
If you study family psychology in the United States, you'll find endless conversations about respecting teenage autonomy. But theory feels very different when you're standing in the hallway, staring at a closed door that used to stay open. For years, her door remained slightly open.
Écouter music playing.
Laughter during FaceTime calls. The hum of homework videos. Sometimes she would call out, "Mom, can you come here?" Or "Dad, what does this word mean?" The house felt connected. Then one evening after dinner, she walked upstairs and quietly shut the door. Click. I paused. There was no argument.
No visible tension. No dramatic shift. Just a normal Tuesday in suburban America.
And yet my chest tightened. For those learning American English through real emotional stories, notice how small actions carry emotional meaning.
Closed the door.
Paused. Tightened. These simple verbs communicate powerful inner shifts. I didn't knock. But I lingered. The hallway felt longer than usual. This is something many parents don't talk about openly. When children seek privacy, parents often experience it as rejection. Not logically. Emotionally. There's a psychological concept called differentiation, the process by which adolescents form identities separate from their parents. It is healthy. It is necessary. It is developmentally expected. But healthy doesn't always mean comfortable. I walked back downstairs and tried to focus on cleaning the kitchen. I told myself what every American parenting podcast says, it's normal. She's growing.
Respect the space.
Still, my mind wandered. Was she upset? Was she hiding something? Was she pulling away? Notice the pattern here. When we lack information, the brain fills gaps with fear-based narratives. This is common in attachment dynamics. Uncertainty activates protective instincts. Later that night, I gently knocked. Yes, she said. Her tone wasn't angry. Just neutral.
Everything okay?
Yeah. Just doing homework. I stood there for a second too long. Okay. Let me know if you need anything. Okay. And that was it.
No invitation inside. No open door conversation. Just a boundary.
Boundaries are complicated in American family culture. On one hand, modern parenting emphasizes emotional openness and communication. On the other hand, teenagers are encouraged to build independence early, part-time jobs, driving at 16, planning for college. Independence is celebrated. But independence naturally reduces constant access. The next few days, the door stayed closed more often. Sometimes unlocked. sometimes locked. Each time I passed by, I felt a small internal reaction. Here's the deeper truth. The door wasn't the problem.
My interpretation was.
Cognitive psychology teaches that events themselves are neutral. Meaning is assigned by thought patterns. A closed door can mean privacy or rejection, depending on the story we attach to it. So I asked myself an uncomfortable question. What story am I telling? The honest answer, I was telling myself that I was being replaced. By friends. By social media. By a growing world that didn't include me at the center anymore. In American culture, especially in individualistic environments, children are raised to prioritize self-discovery. That process naturally shifts emotional energy outward. But that shift is not abandonment. It's expansion. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to test something. Instead of knocking when I felt anxious, I waited until she came out on her own. 2 hours later, she walked downstairs, grabbed a snack, and sat at the kitchen island.
Silence between us for a moment.
Then she said, "Do you ever feel like you don't know what you're doing?" I almost laughed at the timing. "All the time," I answered. She smiled faintly. "Good." That was the doorway.
Not the wooden one upstairs. The emotional one right here.
She started talking about friendships. About feeling unsure in a group project. About comparing herself to others online. None of that required me to force access. It required patience. If I had knocked repeatedly. If I had demanded explanations. If I had treated the closed door as defiance, the conversation downstairs might never have happened. This is something American family therapists emphasize. Connection grows in chosen moments, not controlled ones.
Contrôle mais produce compliance.
But it rarely produces vulnerability. That night, as I walked past her room again, the door was closed. But this time, I didn't feel threatened. I felt respectful. Because a closed door doesn't mean a closed relationship. It can mean, I am learning who I am. And if I truly believe in raising a strong, independent young woman in the United States, then I must tolerate the discomfort of not being constantly included. Emotional maturity in parenting often means regulating your own fear before reacting to your child's growth. For English learners listening to this story, pay attention to recurring emotional vocabulary: boundary, independence, privacy, rejection, expansion, vulnerability. These are common themes in American storytelling about adolescence. A week later, something unexpected happened. Her door was open again.
Not wide open. Just slightly. The way it used to be.
She was sitting at her desk, headphones on, doing homework. She looked up when I passed by. Hey. Hey.
No dramatic réunion.
No symbolic speech. Just normal. And maybe that's the lesson. Growth isn't a straight line away from each other. It's a rhythm. Close.
Open.
Close.
Open.
The door closing didn't mean she was leaving. It meant she trusted the house enough to claim space inside it. And maybe that's the quiet goal of parenting in America, not to keep doors open forever, but to build a home where they can close safely and reopen freely. If you've ever stood in a hallway wondering whether to knock, you're not alone. Sometimes the bravest thing a parent can do is wait. The first time she didn't tell me. I didn't find out from her. I found out from someone else. And that's how I knew something had changed. It wasn't a crisis. It wasn't dangerous. It wasn't dramatic enough to justify panic. It was small, the kind of everyday teenage event that fills American high school hallways with whispers and eye rolls. But I hadn't heard about it from my own daughter. A neighbor mentioned it casually while we were picking up mail. "Oh, I heard the girls had a little falling out," she said. "Middle school drama, right?" I smiled politely. Inside, my stomach dropped. Falling out?
What falling out?
That evening at dinner, she talked about math homework, a history quiz, and a funny TikTok video. She laughed. She seemed normal. And I sat there holding information she didn't know I had. For anyone learning American English through real-life storytelling, notice how tension builds through contrast. She laughed. She seemed normal. And I sat there. Short sentences. Emotional weight. I wanted to ask immediately, "Why didn't you tell me?" But that question carries accusation, even if spoken gently. So I waited. Later that night, as she loaded the dishwasher, I tried something softer. "How are things with your friends?" She shrugged. Fine. Just one word. Fine. In American culture, fine is one of the most emotionally complex words. It can mean okay. It can mean not okay. It can mean I don't want to talk about it. I nodded. Okay. And I walked away. That might sound passive. But it wasn't. It was restraint. In parenting psychology, there's a concept called emotional pacing, allowing someone to share at their own speed instead of forcing disclosure. Teenagers, especially in the United States where independence is emphasized early, guard their social lives carefully. Peer relationships become central during adolescence. According to developmental research, friendships at this stage directly shape identity formation, confidence, and belonging. In other words, what seems like just drama is rarely just drama. But here's the hard truth I had to face. She didn't tell me because she didn't want to.
Not because she forgot.
Not because she didn't have time. Because she chose not to. That realization stung. When children are young, parents are their primary emotional safe space. Every scraped knee.
Every playground disagreement.
Every classroom embarrassment comes home first. Then one day it doesn't. And no one prepares you for that shift. The next morning, I overheard her on the phone in her room. The door was closed, but her voice carried down the hallway. "I just felt left out," she said. Left out. That phrase hit differently. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just hurt. I stood there, frozen for a second, then kept walking. I didn't linger. I didn't eavesdrop intentionally.
I respected the boundary.
But now I understood more. She wasn't hiding something explosive. She was processing something vulnerable. Sometimes teenagers don't tell their parents not because they distrust them, but because they are trying to prove to themselves they can handle it alone. Self-reliance is deeply valued in American culture. We teach kids to problem solve, to advocate for themselves, to build resilience. But resilience is learned through discomfort. And discomfort often happens privately. That afternoon, I made a decision. Instead of confronting her about what I knew, I created space again. At dinner, I shared something small about my own day, a misunderstanding at work. A moment where I felt excluded from a meeting.
Nothing dramatic.
Just honest. I hate that feeling, I said casually. When you think you're included and then realize you're not. She looked up. For a second, her guard dropped. Yeah, she said quietly. There it was. A doorway. Not forced.
Not pried open.
Just offered. We didn't dive into details immediately. She didn't confess everything at once. But over the next few minutes, pieces emerged. They just started a group chat without me. It's probably nothing. I don't even care. That last sentence, I don't even care, sounded convincing on the surface. But her voice was thinner. If you're practicing American English listening, pay attention to contradiction patterns. I don't care often signals the opposite emotionally. Tone carries meaning beyond vocabulary. I didn't say, why didn't you tell me? I didn't say, I heard from someone else. Instead, I asked, do you want advice or just someone to listen? That question matters. In many US-based communication workshops and family therapy sessions, parents are encouraged to clarify their role before responding. Advice and listening are not the same function. She paused. Just listen. So I did. No solutions.
No lecture about loyalty.
No reminders about choosing better friends.
Just listening.
After a few minutes, she exhaled deeply. I guess it just sucks. Yes, I said. It does. And something subtle shifted. Later that night, as I reflected alone, I realized something important. Her not telling me first wasn't a betrayal. It was a developmental milestone. It meant she was experimenting with emotional autonomy. It meant she was testing whether she could survive social pain without immediate parental intervention. That doesn't mean I stop caring. It means I redefine my role. In American family systems, healthy attachment evolves. It doesn't disappear. It transforms from direct management to supportive presence. A week later, she brought it up on her own. By the way, she said while we were driving to the grocery store, about that friend thing. This time, she initiated.
Not because he demanded.
Because she felt ready. She explained more details. There had been misunderstandings. Someone felt jealous. A rumor spread briefly and faded.
Normal teenage complexity.
But the important part wasn't the content. It was the timing. She chose it. And choice builds trust far more effectively than pressure ever could. If I had reacted defensively when I first heard from the neighbor, I might have damaged that trust. If I had said, "Why didn't you tell me?" she might have felt monitored instead of supported. Instead, by tolerating the discomfort of being second to know, I stayed emotionally first to receive. And that's a quiet but powerful distinction. Sometimes parenting isn't about being informed. It's about being available. And availability requires patience, especially when you realize you're no longer the first person they run to.
It hurt a little.
But it also means they're growing. And growth, even when it feels like distance, can still lead back home. The night she cried and didn't want me to fix it. It was almost midnight when I heard it. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a quiet, uneven breath from behind her closed bedroom door. If you've ever lived in a house long enough, you learn its nighttime language, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft shift of pipes, the settling of wood. This sound was different. It was crying. My first instinct was immediate and physical. I stood up in bed before my thoughts even caught up. This is what parenting does. It wires your nervous system to react to distress.
I walked down the hallway slowly.
The door was closed. There it was again, a shaky inhale.
I knocked softly.
Hey, you okay?
Silence.
Then, I'm fine. That word again. Fine. But this time, it cracked. In American family culture, we talk a lot about being emotionally available, about creating safe spaces for vulnerability. But when vulnerability actually appears, raw, unfiltered, inconveniently late at night, our instinct is often to fix it.
To stop the pain.
To solve the problem. To make it better immediately. I heard you, I said gently. Can I come in? A pause. Okay. The room was dim except for the light from her desk lamp. She was sitting on the floor, back against the bed, knees pulled close. Her eyes were red. I sat down a few feet away, not too close.
Space matters.
Especially with teenagers in the United States, where independence and emotional boundaries are emphasized from an early age. What happened? I asked. She shook her head. It's stupid. Emotional minimization is common in adolescence. If you're learning American English through real-life conversations, notice this phrase, it's stupid. It usually means it feels overwhelming but embarrassing at the same time. It doesn't sound stupid, I said. She wiped her face quickly. I feel like I'm bad at everything lately. There it was. Not drama. Not rebellion. Self-doubt. In American high school culture, comparison is constant. Social media amplifies it. Academic pressure reinforces it. College conversations start earlier than they used to. Achievement becomes identity. I studied and still did bad, she continued. Everyone else makes it look easy. My brain immediately generated solutions. Study schedule adjustments. Tutoring options.
Time management advice.
Motivational speeches about growth mindset. But something stopped me. She wasn't asking for solutions. She was sitting on the floor crying. So I asked, do you want help fixing it? Or do you just want me here? She hesitated. Just here. That answer changed everything. There's a powerful communication principle often taught in American therapy settings. Not all pain needs correction. Some pain needs companionship. So I stayed. We didn't talk much for the first few minutes. I just sat there.
Breathing slowly so my nervous system wouldn't escalator.
Eventually she spoke again. I feel like I'm falling behind. Behind what? I wanted to ask. Behind who? But those questions can sound like interrogation. Falling behind feels scary, I said instead. She nodded.
Tears again. Softer now.
If you're studying emotional vocabulary in American English, pay attention to phrases like feels scary, feels overwhelming, feels heavy. These are common ways people describe internal states without dramatic language. After a while, she leaned her head back against the bed frame and stared at the ceiling. Why does everyone else seem so confident? Comparison distortion. Social psychologists in the United States have studied this extensively. Teenagers tend to overestimate others' stability and underestimate their own resilience.
Social media intensifie the illusion.
I don't think everyone feels confident, I said quietly. I think they're just better at hiding the parts they don't like. She didn't respond immediately. Then she whispered, "Do you ever feel like that?" And this was the moment that mattered most. I could either present myself as steady and unshakable, or honest. "Yes," I said, "more than I probably admit." Her eyes shifted toward me. "When I was your age," I continued, "I thought everyone else had a map. I thought I was the only one guessing." She let out a small, unexpected laugh. "That's exactly how it feels. Connection. Not because I fixed anything, but because I normalized it." In many American households, parents unintentionally model perfection. We hide our doubts to appear strong. But vulnerability builds more trust than certainty ever could. We sat there for nearly 30 minutes. No lectures. No productivity plan.
Juste présence.
Eventually she sighed.
À 10 peur, c'était débris.
"I'm still stressed," she said. "I know. But I feel less alone." That sentence mattered more than any strategy one could have offered. Sometimes teenagers don't need a solution at midnight. They need nervous system regulation. They need co-regulation, a calm presence that helps their body remember safety. Before I left the room, I asked gently, "Do you want to think about solutions tomorrow? Or later this week?" "Tomorrow," she said. "Not tonight." "Okay."
He stood up slowly.
As I reached the door, she said, "Thanks for not making it a big thing." That stopped me. Because earlier in my parenting journey, I probably would have made it a big thing. I would have called a meeting, built a plan, monitored grades obsessively, checked assignments daily. Control can look like care, but it doesn't always feel like safety. Back in my bedroom, I realized something subtle but powerful. She didn't need me to fix her feelings. She needed me to tolerate them. There's a difference. In American emotional development conversations, especially in recent years, the focus has shifted from outcome-based parenting to regulation-based parenting. Instead of asking, "How do I stop this emotion?" the question becomes, "How do I help my child move through it safely?" The next morning, she was quieter but stable. We revisited the topic briefly over breakfast. This time, she asked for help organizing her week. Now she was ready for solutions. Because the emotional storm had passed. The night she cried wasn't about grades. It was about fear of inadequacy. And fear cannot be solved by strategy alone. It softens through connection. If you're listening to this story to improve your American English, notice how emotional storytelling blends psychology with everyday life. Words like vulnerability, comparison, regulation, presence, these appear frequently in modern U.S. conversations about parenting and mental health. But beyond vocabulary, here's the deeper message.
Sometimes love is not fixing.
Sometimes love is sitting on the floor at midnight and saying, "I'm here." And trusting that being here is enough.
The day she said, "You don't get it."
It happened on a Saturday afternoon. No big event.
No dramatic setup.
Just the kind of ordinary weekend that feels predictable. Laundry running, sunlight through the kitchen window, music playing faintly from upstairs. She came down looking frustrated. I don't want to go, she said. Go where? I asked. To Emma's thing. I just don't feel like it. In American teenage culture, social events are everything. Birthday parties, study groups, game nights, team dinners. Showing up matters. Not showing up sends signals. You already said you would, I reminded her gently.
She exhaled sharply.
I know. Something was off. What's really going on? I asked. And that's when it came.
You don't get it.
4 words. Simple.
Sharp.
Heavy. If you're learning American English through real emotional conversations, notice how common this phrase is, you don't get it. It doesn't always mean you're incapable of understanding. It often means, I don't feel understood. Still, it hit me defensively. I'm trying to, I said. No, you're not, she shot back. You just think everything is easy. That stung more than I expected.
Everything is easy?
I wanted to respond immediately. To list all the ways I work hard. All the things I manage. All the invisible effort that keeps our family stable. But this wasn't about me. At least, not entirely. In American family dynamics, especially with teenagers, moments like this are identity clashes. Adolescence is when young people start testing emotional independence by pushing against authority. It's not always logical. It's developmental. I'm listening, I said instead. She paced a little in the kitchen. You don't know what it's like.
Everyone is watching everything.
If I go and I'm quiet, they think I'm weird. If I talk too much, they think I'm annoying.
If I leave early, it's rude. If I stay, I'm exhausted.
There it was. Performance pressure.
In modern American teen life, amplifié by social media and constant digital connection, social identity feel public.
Every interaction can feel evaluated. That sounds exhausting, I said. It is. She crossed her arms. And you just say go, you'll have fun.
Like it's that simple. Now I understood.
When I said, you'll have fun, I thought I was encouraging resilience. She heard dismissal. There's a communication principle often discussed in US-based therapy spaces. Intent does not erase impact.
Il met un temps réassurance.
She may experience invalidation. That gap matters. You're right, I said slowly. I don't fully know what it's like now. She looked surprised. Things were different when I was your age. We didn't have phones tracking every social move. We could leave a party and no one posted about it. Her posture softened slightly. It's just a lot, she admitted. This is the tricky part of parenting in the United States today. The cultural environment has shifted dramatically in one generation. Comparison is constant. Visibility is relentless. Privacy is limited. You don't get it isn't an attack. It's a request for acknowledgement. So instead of defending myself, I asked, what would help right now? She shrugged. I don't know. That's okay, I said. We can figure it out. Silence settled between us. In American communication styles, especially in emotionally charged moments, silence often feels uncomfortable. We rush to fill it. But silence can regulate intensity. After a minute, she said, I don't want to cancel. I just don't want to feel fake. That sentence was important. Not laziness. Not defiance. Authenticity. Teenagers are deeply sensitive to authenticity. They can sense when they're performing instead of belonging. What would going in a way that feels real look like? I asked. She considered this. Maybe I just stay an hour. Not the whole time. That sounds reasonable. And if it gets weird, can you pick me up without asking a million questions? I smiled slightly. Yes.
Boundary again. Notre-jection.
Structure. In American parenting conversations, there's increasing emphasis on collaborative problem-solving rather than top-down commands. Instead of "you're going because I said so," the approach becomes, let's make a plan that respects both responsibility and comfort. I'm not trying to make your life harder, I said. I know, she replied, quieter now. It just feels like you think I'm dramatic. There it was, the real fear. Being dismissed. I don't think you're dramatic, I said. I think you're navigating something complicated. Her eyes shifted toward me again. Really? Yes. Social stuff is complicated. It doesn't stop being complicated just because you're young. That validation mattered more than advice. She left for the event 30 minutes later. Not thrilled, but steadier. And here's what I noticed. The conflict wasn't about going to a party. It was about being understood. When she said, "You don't get it," she wasn't closing a door. She was testing whether I would try to walk through it differently. If I had responded defensively, "Of course I get it," the conversation would have escalated. If I had minimized her feelings, she would have withdrawn. Instead, I admitted limitation. And that created trust. Later that evening, she texted,
Can you pick me up?
No explanation. No drama.
Just a request.
I showed up. In the car, she was quiet for a few minutes. Then she said, "It wasn't terrible. Just loud." We both laughed. "You survived," I said. "Barely." But she was smiling. As we drove home through quiet suburban streets, I realized something important. Understanding doesn't always mean sharing identical experiences. It means respecting the emotional reality of someone else's world. If you're listening to this story to improve your American English, pay attention to phrases like "you don't get it," "that sounds exhausting," "what would help right now," "I'm listening." These are common emotional bridges in U.S. communication patterns. More than vocabulary, though, this is about perspective. When teenagers say, "you don't get it," they're not asking you to relive high school. They're asking you to step into their version of it. And sometimes the most powerful response isn't proving you understand. It's saying, "Help me understand." That small shift can turn conflict into connection. And connection, especially in the middle of misunderstanding, is what keeps the door open. The day I realized she was watching me. It didn't happen during an argument. It didn't happen during one of her midnight breakdowns or social conflicts. It happened on a completely ordinary Tuesday morning. I was stressed. Emails unanswered. A deadline pushed up unexpectedly.
Trafic évier d'inusual.
The kind of low-level adult pressure that hums quietly beneath the surface of daily life in America. She was sitting at the kitchen counter, scrolling on her phone while eating cereal. I thought she wasn't paying attention. I was wrong. I sighed loudly and muttered, "This is ridiculous." She looked up. "What's wrong?" "Work stuff," I replied. "It's just a lot." I didn't mean to say it sharply, but my tone carried edge. She studied my face for a second longer than usual. Then she went back to her cereal. The moment passed. Or so I thought. Later that evening, I overheard her in her room talking to a friend. "I don't want to overreact," she said. "It's just a lot." The phrasing stopped me cold. It was mine.
The exact rythme.
The same emotional shorthand. That's when I realized something quietly unsettling. She wasn't just listening when I spoke directly to her. She was observing how I handle my own stress. In American parenting culture, we often focus on what we teach verbally, lessons about responsibility, kindness, resilience. But social learning theory, widely discussed in U.S. psychology research, tells us something deeper. Children model behavior.
Note instruction.
Behavior. I replayed the morning in my head. My sigh.
My sharp tone. My frustration leaking into the room.
If I tell her to regulate her emotions, but I don't regulate mine, what am I actually teaching? For those learning American English through real-life storytelling, notice the repetition pattern here. Short reflective questions create emotional emphasis.
What am I modeling?
What is she absorbing? This is common in personal development narratives across the United States. The next day, I tested something. Same kitchen.
Some morning routine.
Another stressful email.
I felt the irritation rise again. Tight shoulder, shallow breath.
But this time, I paused. I took one slow breath. Then another. I said out loud calmly, "Okay? I can handle this."
She glanced up again.
No comment. But she noticed. You can feel it when someone is tracking your emotional tone. Parenting teenagers in America today isn't just about managing their digital world, their social lives, or their academic performance. It's about understanding that they are studying us constantly. How we argue. How we apologize. How we recover from mistakes. That evening, something else happened. We were driving home from the grocery store when another car cut me off abruptly. My reflex was immediate: annoyance, defensive energy, the urge to criticize loudly. But before I spoke, I caught her watching me from the passenger seat. Waiting. I exhaled. "Maybe they're just in a rush," I said instead. She smirked slightly. "Wow," she replied. "Growth." We both laughed. But beneath the humor was something important. She had expectations about how I handle frustration. And those expectations were built from years of observation. There's a concept in American family psychology called emotional mirroring. Children unconsciously internalize how caregivers respond to stress and conflict. Those responses become templates for their own coping strategies. If I escalate quickly, she learns escalation.
If I shut down, she learns avoidance.
If I regulate and repair, she learns recovery. A week later, she had a rough afternoon. A disagreement with a friend. A lower than expected quiz score. She walked into the house visibly tense. Old patterns might have led her to snap or isolate. Instead, she put her bag down and said, "It's just a lot. But I'll handle it." Again. My language. But this time, steadier. I felt something shift inside me, not pride exactly, but awareness. She isn't just reacting to what I say to her. She's building her emotional vocabulary from how I live. That realization is both empowering and terrifying, because it means I can't outsource the lesson.
I can't preach calm and practice chaos.
In American culture, especially with the growing focus on mental health and emotional intelligence, parents are increasingly encouraged to model self-regulation openly. Not perfection, regulation. There's a difference. Perfection says, I never get overwhelmed. Regulation says, I get overwhelmed, and I know how to move through it. One night at dinner, she asked unexpectedly, how do you not freak out all the time? I laughed.
I do freak out.
Just not always out loud. She nodded thoughtfully. So you just breathe? Sometimes. Sometimes I take a walk. Sometimes I mess up and apologize. That word landed. Apologize. In many American households in previous generations, parents rarely apologized to children. Authority was firm, unquestioned. But modern family dynamics are shifting. Accountability builds trust more effectively than dominance. A few days later, I lost my temper about something small, dishes left in the sink. My voice was sharper than necessary. The room went quiet. And there it was again, her eyes watching. Later that evening, I knocked on her door. Hey, I said. I was more intense than I needed to be earlier. I'm sorry. She blinked, surprised. It's okay. No, I said gently. It's not about okay. It's about me owning it. She nodded slowly. Thanks. That moment might seem minor. But apologies are emotional blueprints. They teach that conflict doesn't equal rupture. It equals repair. If you're practicing American English listening skills, pay attention to phrases like I own it, I messed up, I can handle this. These are common expressions in U.S. conversations around accountability and resilience. The day I realized she was watching me wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, subtle, but it changed how I move through ordinary stress. Because every sigh, every reaction, every recovery becomes part of her emotional education.
En dire the deeper truth.
She will forget many of my lectures. But she will remember how I handled hard days. She will remember whether tension exploded or softened. She will remember whether mistakes were hidden or repaired. Parenting isn't just guidance. It's demonstration. And demonstration requires awareness. Now when I feel stress rising, I don't suppress it for performance.
I regulate it for modeling.
Not because I'm perfect, but because I finally understand something essential. She's not just listening to what I tell her about strength. She's learning what strength looks like by watching me live it. The morning I knew she would be okay. It wasn't a graduation. It wasn't a milestone birthday. It wasn't even a big, cinematic moment. It was a random Thursday morning.
Sunlight filtered through the kitchen blind. The coffee machine humid.
The house carried its usual weekday rhythm. Backpacks, chargers, last-minute reminders. She came downstairs already dressed, hair slightly messy but intentional in that effortless teenage way. I'm leaving early, she said. I want to talk to Ms. Carter before class. That caught my attention. About what? Just some stuff. I think I need help organizing my schedule better. She said it casually, calmly.
No panique. No midnight tears. Just initiative.
And that's when I felt it, a quiet shift in my chest. For anyone learning American English through real emotional storytelling, notice how transformation is often revealed in small behavioral changes. Not dramatic speeches.
Not emotional breakthrough.
Just different choices. Months ago, she would have spiraled privately. Weeks ago, she might have cried on her bedroom floor. Now, she was proactively seeking support. Without prompting. Without being told. I think that's a great idea, I said. She nodded, grabbing a granola bar. I don't want to feel behind again. Behind. That word used to carry panic. Now it carried strategy. In American high school culture, pressure is constant. Academic expectations, extracurricular commitments, social comparison, college conversations that seem to start earlier every year. Many teens feel like they're racing an invisible clock. But this time, she wasn't overwhelmed. She was adjusting. That's resilience. Not the absence of stress. The ability to respond to it. After she left, I stood in the kitchen longer than necessary. I realized something subtle but powerful. She didn't need me to push her. She had internalized the process.
Regulate.
Reflect. Act. In developmental psychology, especially in US-based parenting frameworks, there's an idea called scaffolding. Parents provide support structures early on, emotional regulation, problem-solving, language for feelings. Over time, those supports are gradually removed as the child internalizes them.
Scaffolding isn't permanent.
It's transitional. And that morning, I could see the structure lifting. Later that week, something else confirmed it. She had another social event, the kind that once triggered anxiety spirals. I'll go for a bit, she said. If it's weird, I'll leave. No big deal. No big deal. Those words used to feel impossible for her. I didn't offer a backup plan. I didn't pre-schedule a rescue text. I simply said, sounds good. Parenting in America today often feels like walking a tightrope between involvement and over-involvement. Between protecting and over-protecting. Between guiding and controlling. But the ultimate goal isn't constant supervision. It's internal stability. That evening, she came home smiling. It was actually fun, she admitted. I smiled back. But what mattered wasn't the fun. It was her tone. Neutral. Balanced.
No émotionnel extrême.
For those practicing American English listening skills, pay attention to how emotional growth shows up in phrasing. Instead of it was terrible or it was amazing, she said, it was actually fun. Measured. Grounded. A few days later, we had a small disagreement about curfew. Old patterns might have escalated quickly. Instead, she said, I get why you're saying that. I just think an extra 30 minutes makes sense.
I almost looked.
Not because she was wrong, but because she was negotiating calmly.
No slammed doors. No, you don't get it.
Just reasoning. And in that moment, I knew something had solidified. All the nights of sitting on the floor while she cried.
All the times I chose listening over lecturing.
All the moments I admitted I didn't fully understand. They weren't wasted. They were building something invisible. Emotional muscle. In American culture, we often celebrate visible milestones, awards, college acceptances, public achievements. But emotional maturity is quieter. It shows up in how someone handles disappointment, how they ask for help, how they apologize, how they self-correct. One Sunday afternoon, she sat beside me on the couch. "Do you ever get scared I'll mess up?" she asked suddenly. The honesty surprised me. "Of course," I said gently.
Everyone mess up.
She waited. "But I'm not scared you'll stay stuck," I added. She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've seen you feel overwhelmed and come back from it.
IVE sinuandel hard conversation.
I've seen you adjust when something doesn't work." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know you noticed." "I notice." That's another truth in parenting. Growth often feels invisible to the person experiencing it. But to someone watching closely, it's undeniable. If you're listening to this story to improve your American English, notice phrases like "come back from it," "handle hard conversations," "stay stuck." These expressions are common in conversations about resilience and personal development across the United States. The morning I knew she would be okay wasn't about certainty that life would be easy for her. It was about confidence in her coping ability. There's a difference.
Life in America, like anywhere, is impredictable.
Academic competition, social pressure, career uncertainty. None of that disappears. But she now had tools. Emotional awareness.
Communication skill.
The ability to pause before reacting. The courage to ask for help. And perhaps most importantly, the understanding that feelings are temporary states, not permanent identities. That night, as I walked past her room, the door was half open.
Music playing softly.
Homework spread across her desk. She looked up. Hey. No tension. No distance. Just normal. And suddenly, normal felt extraordinary. Because normal now included growth.
Indépendance without isolation.
Confidence without arrogance. Vulnerability without collapse. I went to bed that night lighter than I had in years. Not because parenting was finished. It never is. But because I finally understood something fundamental. My job was never to eliminate her struggles. It was to help her build the capacity to face them. And watching her walk out the door that Thursday morning, choosing support, choosing action, choosing responsibility, I knew she had that capacity.
She will stumble again.
She will doubt herself again. She will probably say, "You don't get it," at least a few more times. But beneath all of that, there is a foundation now. And foundations are what last. That's how I knew she would be okay. Not perfect. Not immune to pain. But okay. And sometimes as a parent, okay is everything. The day she didn't need me, and still chose me. I always thought the hardest day in parenting would be the day she stopped needing me. I was wrong. The hardest day was the day she didn't need me, and I had to decide who I was without that role. It started with something small. Her car wouldn't start. A year ago, that situation would have triggered immediate panic. Mom. Dad. What do I do? This time, my phone buzzed with a simple text.
Car won't start.
I called roadside assistance.
ILLB à little let.
That was it.
No frantic énergie. No emotional spiral. Just information.
For anyone learning American English through real-life emotional storytelling, notice how maturity is often shown through tone rather than vocabulary. Short, clear sentences signal regulation. I stared at the message longer than necessary. She had handled it. Without me. I felt pride first. Then something unexpected.
À small, sharpash.
For years, my identity had been deeply intertwined with being needed.
Problème solvé. Émotionnel encore.
Immediate responder. And now? She was becoming her own. Modern American parenting culture talks a lot about raising independent, resilient kids. We celebrate autonomy. We post about it. We encourage it. But no one really talks about the quiet identity shift parents go through when that autonomy actually shows up. Later that afternoon, she walked through the door, slightly annoyed but composed. It was just the battery, she said. They replaced it. You handled it well, I replied. She shrugged, almost embarrassed by the compliment. It wasn't a big deal. There was that phrase again. Not a big deal. It used to take tears, pacing, overthinking. Now it took action. That night, something else happened. She sat down next to me on the couch. Not because she needed advice. Not because she was overwhelmed. Just because. Can I show you something? She asked. She pulled up a draft of a college essay she was working on. I don't need you to edit it, she said quickly. I just want to know if it makes sense. That distinction mattered. She wasn't outsourcing the work. She was inviting perspective. In American family communication, especially with older teenagers, this shift is powerful. It moves from dependency to collaboration.
Read it slowly.
It was about growth.
About feeling behind.
About learning that asking for help isn't weakness. She had written, I used to think strength meant doing everything alone. Now I think it means knowing when to pause and reach out. I swallowed hard. Because that lesson didn't come from a lecture. It came from lived experience. From the nights I sat on her bedroom floor. From the moments I said, I'm listening. From the times I admitted I didn't have all the answers. She had absorbed more than I realized. For those practicing American English listening skills, pay attention to reflective phrasing in essays and storytelling. I used to think. Now I think. This structure is common in personal growth narratives across the United States. Does it make sense? She asked. It does, I said carefully.
It sounds like you.
She smiled slightly. Good. Then she leaned back into the couch cushion and stayed there. No urgency. No tension. Just quiet companionship. And that's when I understood something profound. Being needed is powerful. But being chosen is deeper. When children are young, proximity is automatic. They need you physically.
Logistically.
Emotionally. As they grow, proximity becomes voluntary. And voluntary closeness is sacred. A few days later, she had another challenging moment, a disappointing grade on a presentation she worked hard on. She processed it differently this time. She went for a walk. Came home. Made tea.
Den knockait dans my office d'or.
Can I vent for 5 minutes? 5 minutes. Timed.
Intentionnel.
Yes, I said. She vented. Clear. Organized. Emotional but not spiraling. Then she paused. I think I know what I'll do differently next time. There it was again. Reflection before reaction. Problem solving without collapse. In American psychology discussions, this is often described as emotional regulation combined with executive function, the ability to manage feelings while planning next steps. It's not innate. It's modeled, built, practiced, and watching her demonstrate it felt surreal. But the most surprising moment came one Sunday morning. We were making pancakes. Flour everywhere. Music playing softly in the background. Out of nowhere, she said, I know I act like I don't need you sometimes. I looked at her. But I'm glad you're there, she added. There was no drama in her voice. Just fact. And that's when it clicked fully. Independence doesn't erase attachment. It transforms it. She doesn't need me to fix her car, or solve her friend conflicts, or manage her schedule. But she still values my presence.
My steadiness. My perspective.
Parenting teenagers in America today means adjusting to that transformation. It means shifting from director to consultant, from rescuer to witness,
From contrôleur to collaborateur.
And that shift requires humility, because it asks us to let go of being central, to become supportive instead of essential. That's not a loss. It's evolution. If you're listening to this story to improve your American English, notice the recurring emotional vocabulary: autonomy, collaboration, reflection, regulation, presence. These words are common in modern U.S. conversations about parenting and mental health. But beyond vocabulary, here's the deeper truth. The goal was never to keep her dependent. It was to raise someone capable. Capable of handling stress. Capable of asking for help. Capable of recovering from mistakes. And capable of choosing connection freely. The day she didn't need me felt bittersweet. But the day she chose to sit beside me, share her essay, and say, I'm glad you're there, that felt like success. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady. And steady is what lasts.
She will live one day. Collège.
Career.
A life built beyond this house.
But if she leaves knowing she can handle herself, and still come back when she wants to, then I've done my job. Not perfectly. Not flawlessly. But intentionally.
En somme-t-il intentionnel neuf. The night before she left.
The suitcase sat open on her bedroom floor. Half packed. Half chaotic. Exactly like every other stage of her life, progress mixed with hesitation. Tomorrow, she would leave for college. Not across the country. Not dramatically far. But far enough that her room would no longer be occupied every night. Far enough that the house would shift.
For years, imaginait 10 moments à cinématique.
Tears. Long speeches. Emotional music playing in the background. Instead, it felt strangely quiet. She was folding sweatshirts while half watching a show on her laptop. Do you think I need more hangers? She asked casually. Probably not the profound last question I expected. Maybe a few, I said.
We drove to the store one more time. Fluorescent lights.
Plastic bins. College dorm checklists. The ordinary details of American back-to-school culture, extra-long twin sheets, shower caddies, desk lamps. In the United States, the transition to college is often treated as a symbolic leap into adulthood.
Movies romanticisent it. Social media document it. Parents postent nostalgique photos.
But the emotional reality is more layered. It's pride mixed with ache. Excitement layered over quiet grief. That night, after the car was loaded, we sat in the living room together.
No agenda.
No checklist. Just space. You nervous? I asked. A little, she admitted. About what? She shrugged. Everything. Nothing. Just new.
New.
Such a small word for such a massive transition. If you're learning American English through emotional storytelling, notice how often simple adjectives carry deep meaning.
New.
Hard. Different.
Big.
Context gives them weight. I remember feeling that way, I said. She looked at me. But I didn't handle it like you, I added. She smiled faintly. What do you mean? I pretended I wasn't scared. I tried to act like I had it all figured out. And it took me longer to settle in because I didn't ask for help. She nodded slowly. I think I'll ask for help. That sentence settled something inside me. Because that was the real milestone.
Not leaving home.
But knowing she doesn't have to do it alone. In American parenting conversations, we often talk about preparing kids for the real world. But the real world isn't conquered through independence alone. It's navigated through connection, resourcefulness, and emotional awareness. And she had those. Later, she went upstairs to shower. I stood in her doorway for a moment. The walls still held remnants of childhood, faint tape marks from posters long removed. A shelf of books she outgrew but couldn't quite discard. This room had witnessed everything.
The slammed doors. The midnight tears.
The laughter with friends on speakerphone.
The whispered, you don't get it. And the softé, thanks for being there.
Parenting isn't a straight line. It's 1,000 small conversations layered over years. And now those years had condensed into one quiet night. When she came back downstairs, hair damp, wearing an oversized sweatshirt, she looked younger for a second. Or maybe I was just remembering. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. Were you ever scared I wouldn't be okay?
The question caught me off guard.
Yes, I said honestly. Sometimes. She held my gaze. But I'm not scared anymore. Why? Because I've watched you handle hard things. I've watched you figure stuff out. I know you can.
She inhaled slowly.
And I know I can too. There it was. The echo.
Everything modeled.
Everything practiced. Everything repaired. For those practicing American English listening skills, notice the rhythm of parallel phrasing. I've watched you. I know you can. I know I can too. This kind of mirrored structure is common in meaningful emotional exchanges. We didn't cry dramatically. There were tears later, at the dorm drop-off, of course. That part is almost unavoidable in American college culture. But the night before was steady. Grounded.
Intentionnel.
In many ways, it reflected the journey we had taken. Less reactivity. More reflection. Less control. More trust. Before going to bed, she hugged me longer than usual. Not clinging.
Not desperate.
Just aware. Thanks, she said. For what? For not freaking out when I did.
He looked softly. He freaked out plenty.
I just tried not to do it in front of you. She pulled back slightly. I know. That surprised me. You always knew? Mostly, she said. But you always came back calm.
Came back calm.
That phrase felt like the summary of everything. Because calm isn't constant. It's returned to. The next morning, as we drove to campus, sunlight cutting through early traffic, I realized something powerful. She wasn't leaving fragile. She wasn't leaving dependent. She wasn't leaving unprepared. She was leaving aware. Aware of her emotions. Aware of her limits. Aware of her ability to recover. That's the difference between sheltering a child and strengthening one. If you're listening to this story to improve your American English, pay attention to vocabulary around transitions, milestone, independence, resilience, transition, awareness. These words frequently appear in U.S. discussions about adolescence and adulthood. But beyond language, here's what matters most. The night before she left wasn't about losing her. It was about witnessing who she had become. Not someone who never struggles. But someone who doesn't collapse under struggle. Not someone who never says, "You don't get it." But someone who eventually says, "I think I do." As we unloaded the car and set up her dorm room, she moved with quiet confidence. I stepped back more than I stepped in. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to manage the moment. I trusted it.
He trusted her.
And that trust, built slowly, imperfectly, intentionally, was the real graduation. Not the ceremony that will come later.
Not the diploma.
But the internal shift. She will call. She will struggle again. She will probably cry at midnight sometimes. But she will also regulate, reflect, and reach out. And that's enough. The night before she left, I didn't lose my daughter. I gained the privilege of watching her walk forward, steady, capable, and fully her own. If you've watched this entire journey, from the first slam door to the quiet night before college, then maybe you weren't just listening to a story. Maybe you were recognizing one. Parenting isn't loud most of the time. It's not built from viral moments or dramatic speeches. It's built from thousands of invisible decisions. Choosing to listen instead of lecture. Choosing to pause instead of react. Choosing to regulate instead of control. And if there's one truth that runs through every chapter of this story, it's this. Emotional safety doesn't happen by accident. It's built intentionally. In modern American parenting culture, especially in 2026, where conversations around mental health, emotional intelligence, and teenage independence are louder than ever, we are constantly asking, how do we raise resilient kids? How do we help teenagers handle stress, social pressure, academic anxiety, and self-doubt? How do we stay connected without controlling? But maybe the better question is, how do we grow alongside them? Because this wasn't just her coming-of-age story. It was mine too. Every time she said, "You don't get it," I had to decide whether to defend or to understand. Every time she cried at midnight, I had to choose between fixing and staying. Every time she pulled away, I had to confront my own fear of becoming unnecessary. And in the end, the biggest shift wasn't hers. It was mine. I stopped trying to eliminate her struggles. I started helping her build the capacity to face them. That difference changes everything. If you're a parent navigating teenage independence in America, or anywhere in the world, you already know this truth. The goal is not to be needed forever. The goal is to be trusted long after you're no longer required. And here's the part that might surprise you. The story doesn't end when they leave home. It evolves. There will be new seasons, new tensions.
New version of You Don't Get It.
There will also be new conversations.
Adulte to adulte moment.
Shared vulnerability. But that foundation, the one built through emotional regulation, honest apologies, collaborative problem solving, and steady presence, that foundation lasts. If this series resonated with you, it's probably because you're living your own version of it. Maybe your child is younger. Maybe your child is older. Maybe you're still in the middle of slammed doors and midnight tears. Or maybe you're standing in a quiet room wondering where the years went.
Wherever you are in the journée, here's what you want you to remember.
You don't have to be perfect to be powerful. You just have to be intentional. Intentional about your tone. Intentional about your reactions. Intentional about the emotional blueprint you're modeling every day. Because they are watching.
Not just what you say,
but how you live. And if you're not a parent, maybe you're here to improve your American English through real emotional storytelling, then you've also experienced something powerful. You've learned the vocabulary of modern U.S. family life. You've heard authentic conversational phrases used in real contexts. You've absorbed the rhythm of emotional dialogue in American culture. That matters. Language isn't just grammar. It's psychology. It's tone.
It's human connection.
And this channel exists for exactly that reason. To explore real-life emotional stories. To unpack modern parenting conversations in the United States. To help you improve your English listening skills naturally, through narrative, reflection, and meaningful dialogue. But here's the part that makes this community different. We're not just telling stories. We're building awareness together. So if this series made you pause, if it made you rethink a conversation,
if it made you feel less alone in your parenting journée,
then don't just watch quietly.
Joins the conversation. Index revers pointant vers la droite blanc comme en bilo.
Which moment felt the most real to you? Was it the closed door?
The midnight tears?
The first time they didn't tell you something? Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if you want more deep, emotionally intelligent storytelling about modern parenting, teenage independence, and real American English conversation practice, make sure you subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because the next story might explore something even more complex. What happens when they come back home? What happens when roles reverse? What happens when the child becomes the one holding space for the parent? That chapter is coming.
And trust me, it change everything.
Until then, remember this.
Connection isn't about controlling the journée.
It's about walking beside someone long enough that when they step forward alone, they carry your steadiness with them. If that's the kind of growth you believe in, this channel is for you. I'll see you in the next story.